Every
Yeah.
footfall, every movement is taken into consideration. Realization that the reason why you're a tough guy is because you're afraid
Yeah.
not to be. And it's hard to understand the ultimate mother of all identifications.
Recently, I had an opportunity to sit down with Paul Rezendes, yogi, tracker, spiritual elder, and former gang leader for a wide-ranging discussion on topics like the benefits of tracking, fear and masculinity, and listening to the wildness within. You're going to want to sit down and grab a pen and notebook for this one. Paul drops some elder wisdom bombs that'll make you stop in your tracks. Get ready. It's time to step into the Wild Lab.
Welcome back to the Wild Lab, everybody. I am with my guest today, Paul Rezendes, I'm just thrilled to have him here. I've been waiting to have this conversation for a very long time. Paul is a former gang leader, a tracker, a yogi, an author of 2 books, The Wild Within and Tracking in the Art of Seeing. And like I said, this is the conversation that I've been deeply looking forward to drop in with you, Paul. Paul, welcome to the Wild Lab.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to be talking with you.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Hanging out.
Hanging out, man. Absolutely. Well, I just want to start by talking a little bit about your journey, right? So that folks can understand and get to know you a little bit better. There's a lot of things I want to dive into. Definitely want to dive into wildness. I want to dive into tracking, and listening and seeing and all of those things. But as we get started, can you just tell folks a little bit about your journey from, from a gang leader to a tracker, to a yogi, to the man that sits in front of us today. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of different lives, Ned.
It is.
Kind of, I don't know where to start. Um, I started off as when I was a kid, I used to get beat up a lot.
Mm.
And I didn't know how to fight, but I learned. And I became one of the toughest street fighters around,
Mm.
and a gang leader in my teens. And then it became a gang leader of 2 different notorious motorcycle gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point along the way, a, a voice out of what we'll call the wilderness came in, because there's an intelligence there in all of us that I feel is uncultivated,
Mm.
right? It is ancient. And that speaks to us sometimes, or it reveals to us our limitations. It's often revealing our limitations. And at that point in my life, when I was the leader of the Devil's Disciples motorcycle gang, that was the second one. The first one was the Huns.
Mm.
Uh, there was this realization that I was this macho guy living this macho persona
Mm.
because I was afraid not to be tough.
Yeah.
Underneath that macho persona was fear.
Yeah.
Like that messed up the game.
Yeah.
That really changed my life in a big way. But when that happens, when you have an ego and when you think that you're the one that's in control of the thought process, you're the one that is the intelligence,
Mm.
then you just assume, oh yeah, I saw that.
Mm-hmm.
But but at that time, I didn't realize something was revealing my limitations, my
Mm.
truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that at the time it seemed like I'm doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So different things happened. I remember one other big change was I had an apartment in Westport, Massachusetts, and at the time we were warring with another motorcycle gang called Gypsy Jokers.
Mm-hmm.
And that night I was sleeping and I heard somebody's bashing in my door and my wife screaming, right? So I got a 357 Magnum in my drawer on my bureau. I jumps out of the bed. I'm running for the gun. I'm going to shoot over the heads, and I figured that'll scare them off. I figure it's the Gypsy Jokers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, my bedroom door busts open. There's all these cops, some feds, and you're under arrest. I was just about to open the drawer and grab my 347 when I
Yeah.
have all these guns pointing at me.
Yeah.
That would have been the end of it, had that gun in my hand.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and then so that makes you like say, okay, what am I doing with my life here?
Right.
And then I had to go to court and everything. They had found, I don't know, let's see, it was at least one or two shopping bags full of marijuana. So they got me for that, right? And I remember sitting in the courtroom. But I had a steady job at the time, running, driving heavy equipment. And I had one of the best records in that company for attendance and being to work on time and all that. And my boss really, really came and stuck up for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's why uh, things panned out the way they did. But I looked at the judge and he says, I pronounce you guilty.
Mm.
I sentence you to 5 to 10 years in Walpole State Prison, which is one of the hardest prisons here in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a silence that felt like an eternity before he said, sentence suspended, 3 years probation. Okay. Then you ask yourself again, like, okay, what's this all about? But that I didn't realize it at the time. That was the break for me because there was a lot of the things happening in the clubs that I was uncomfortable with.
And the motorcycle clubs. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was uncomfortable with, and I was thinking, maybe I should get out of this,
Mm-hmm.
But that was the good excuse for me to turn in my colors and tell them I'm going to lay low for a while
Right.
I'm on probation. And I moved my family, continued working where I was working, and then uh, what happened was I really needed to change my life.
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I figured, well, I was brought up Catholic. I need to get back to the church. I need to get back to religion. I need to get back to taking the sacraments and all that. But I was married to a divorced woman, so I couldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to ask for help, and this person who was supposed to be a Catholic saint told me to write the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. She said, take a vow of celibacy for a year and wait until, show God how serious you are and God
Mm.
will answer you. So I wrote the Pope for annulment.
Wow.
I waited about a year
Mm-hmm.
and I did everything I was supposed to do and more. The answer came back from the Pope. Nope.
Mm.
No
Wow.
annulment.
Wow.
Now, this was probably one of the most important times in my life because for once in my life, Ned, I wanted to know the truth.
Mm.
And I'll explain that in a minute.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, is there a God?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know what's the truth here. I don't care what the truth is anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We live our lives pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain all the time.
Right.
Okay, forget all that. I don't care if it's painful. What's the truth here?
Yeah.
You know? But when that happens in the person's life, there's a change in energy that's not understood. The energy's going from an ego-based searching for comfort and avoiding pain to just what is the truth?
Right.
What's going on here?
Right.
So that energy is different. And that changed my life. I started doing hatha yoga, and I read all kinds of Krishnamurti philosophy, all kinds of stuff. And eventually I had my own yoga ashram.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, and the biggest turning point, um, but I'm skipping something because let's see now. No, it was after the ashram. But during the ashram, um, this is very hard to articulate. Okay,
Yeah.
so bear with me here because
Yeah. Absolutely.
words are going to fail here. You've
We're with you.
read my books, so you know probably where I'm going.
Right.
But there was a lot of self-inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Looking into the thought process, trying to understand the thought process. And there was an examination there. There was a pure observation, like when you're tracking an animal, which I know you've done and which I know you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Coyote doesn't need an intellect to track the deer. He needs his good nose. It's all visceral.
Right.
It's very visceral. And when you're tracking an animal, you don't need thought. It's
Mm-hmm.
very visual and visceral at the
Mm-hmm.
same. The coyote might be using his nose, but we use our eyes to track.
Mm-hmm.
Very visual. And there's just a passion there to understand the animal, to really have some intimacy with that life. There's a real love for being there in the forest and with nature and having some intimacy with that animal. And then that's where the learning comes. The learning comes through that passion, that love, that observation. There's an intelligence operating deeply there. The intellect, you don't even need the intellect
Yeah.
because you're going to become intimate with nature and intimate with all the interbeing there and all the entanglement there and all the co-creation there
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
by observing nature's workings, death and dying in the forest. When you
Mm.
become intimate with that, you become intimate with how everything's entangled.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can take that kind of passion and go into the inner wilderness and track the animal called self.
Mm.
Who
Yes.
is that animal? What is that
Yeah.
animal? How does, what supports it? What's it made of?
Right.
And he leaves all kinds of tracks like identification,
Yeah.
all kinds of words and thoughts and authoritarian principles.
Mm.
It's fascinating. And when you fall in that, fall in love with that inner landscape like you
Mm.
fall in love with the outer landscape. There can be intimacy.
Mhm.
So one day I was walking in the forest out back at the ashram, and I was doing just that, what I described. Really paying attention to every breath. And there was lots of pine, pollen. I mean, the floor of the forest was yellow from it.
Mm. Yeah.
Birds in canopy, no wind, very beautiful, beautiful time. And I was tracking that
Mhm.
and that guy, you know.
Mhm.
And and all of a sudden there was a realization that guy, Paul, was observing thought,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Paul, the idea of me, the idea of a me that is the thinker of the thought, created by thought. Thought creates this idea that there's a thinker thinking the thought. That's
Right.
an idea we believe in.
Right.
We believe in and we identify with that.
Mm.
And that is watching thought. So thought is actually watching thought. Thought
Mhm.
is fighting itself and trying to understand and see itself. But it can't because it keeps dividing. It can't see the whole picture.
Right.
But something's seeing it.
Mhm.
Something came in that time when I was called the macho gang leader and showed me that the undercurrent of that was fear. But I thought the thinker, the one who was intelligent, the one who was aware, conscious, got that.
Right.
But this time I was blind, but there was
Mm.
seeing, there was actual seeing.
Mm.
And that was the ancient wild observation intelligence revealing again my limitation. And in some circles, that's called an awakening.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there's an awakening to the fact of your blindness, and there's something universally intelligent and aware that is moving in you. It's
Yeah.
moving in coyote and the plants and the mycelium. That's the wild intelligence in nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nature itself has that's its intelligence. We all have that intelligence.
Mm.
And that's the wildness. We
Mhm.
don't have to take care of nature. It can take care of itself.
Mhm.
We need to let it take care of itself.
Yeah.
But now you have the same attitude inwardly to that wilderness within that you have outwardly,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, um, to me, the tracking is an incredible metaphor for all of this.
Yeah. 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 Paul, that's beautiful, brother. Thank you. There's so much to unpack there. Um, and it just reminds me, I had a client text me the other day on WhatsApp and ask me the question. He wanted to go tracking. He wanted to go tracking for bear and wanted me to teach him how. And he said, "Well, how long do I need? How long do I need? How long do I need to learn how to do?" And I said, "Oh, that's an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year, a lifetime. Like it's this is this is not just this is not just a thing that, I mean, I can, yeah, sure, I can take you into the woods and I can teach you what a track looks like and we can follow the track and we can do the things. But what I hear you talking about is something so much more profound, right? Is that tracking of the inner wilderness, which is truly the point of all of this, right? Yeah, it's really, I think it's really exciting and powerful to track an animal and have an animal encounter, whether it's physical, or what, or not. But as you said, it's really that wildness within and tracking that, and our own identities, or these things that we come to know as our own identities. That is really the powerful thing. I want to follow up with like a couple questions about, well, one question about fear, because a lot of men listen to this podcast, because a lot of the people that come to our academies are men. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to this idea that fear was what was the driving force behind some of this machismo, the driving force behind, you uh, being a motorcycle gang leader. Can you talk a little bit to that, and perhaps yeah, just unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear, Ned. I mean, when there's a realization that the reason why you're a tough guy is because you're afraid
Yeah,
not to be,
yeah,
because if you don't have a real tough persona, you're going to get taken advantage of, you feel. There's
mm-hmm,
fear behind that,
yeah,
but if I can put on a real tough persona, people are going to leave me alone,
mm-hmm,
and they're going to respect me,
mm-hmm,
and they're not going to take advantage of me. And it's about power, right? Power,
mm-hmm.
we think if we have enough power, it'll get rid of the fear, but that the need for the power is fear.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's so important to, I think, understand that. And no, I'm feeling I need to say something. I really appreciate the kind of work you're doing,
mm,
because I
thank
feel
you.
like it's so important for people to, if you track an animal long enough,
Mm-hmm,
and you're a tracker. When you become intimate with the tracks and with the animals, sometimes you can even tell by the tracks which way the animal's looking. We used to have
mm-hmm,
programs, so you're learning a lot about the animal. We used to have programs where we would track an animal for 2 days.
mm-hmm,
Uh, Needed snow to do that, but
mm-hmm,
we used to track an animal for 2 days, and then we used to sleep out wherever we ended up in the snow, get up the next morning and keep tracking.
mm-hmm,
Those are incredible programs. And when you keep doing that, and for instance, I want to add one more thing. I used to have a job working for a biologist for the state of Massachusetts.
mm-hmm,
My job to find the fresh tracks of a deer.
mm,
And then I was supposed to follow that deer, not getting it mixed up with other deer, just follow that deer and write down everything it ate all day.
mm-hmm,
Done that for years. Okay, so when you're doing that kind of tracking, when you're becoming intimate with animals like that, you begin to realize that this animal is the forest dancing.
mm, yeah,
The flesh of
yeah,
that deer is the forest breathing, walking, running,
yeah,
living its life, right? And then when the coyote takes the deer, we,
mm,
like the biologist I worked for, there was a big reservoir here, and sometimes the deer would go out on the ice to try to get away.
mm,
Uh,
mm-hmm,
but they normally will run for water, because if they can get in water, then they can stand in deep water and they're safe. The
mm-hmm,
coyotes can't get them there,
mm-hmm,
right? they can't maneuver in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the carcasses would end up on the ice, and we would have to get there within 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Most carcasses mostly gone, and my biologist friend's not going to get his FEMA, so he wants to know what the health of the deer when it died.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to try to get there in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That deer has dispersed right back into the forest and the life of all the animals in the forest.
Yeah.
You know, it. So this is the importance of the work you're doing to me. The importance of the work you're doing is to bring people are hunting animals, and yes, they're killing an animal. And that also can bring sensitivity. That animal that you just killed is your life. There's,
Absolutely.
look at just for us to do this program, how many thousands of beings had to die?
Yeah.
To talk
Yeah.
on your phone, to drive your vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? So, but to come face to face with an animal that you just killed and to give thanks to it for your
Mm.
life, it's a very intimate thing. And one can become intimate with the interconnectedness of things and how everything is interrelated.
Yeah.
And then there can be compassion for the earth.
Mm.
There can be compassion for wildlife.
Right.
That's us.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah.
So you keep doing what you're doing. Now we need to
Yeah.
take that
Mm-hmm.
compassion.
Yeah.
And we need, because there's still a division inwardly, right? Human beings are very divided because of their identifications. So there's intimacy now with the outer wilderness, but there's no intimacy inwardly.
Mm.
And we're still divided, see? We're
Mm-hmm.
whole when we look at nature, but when we look at other human beings, we're divided
Yeah.
into political groups, into religious groups, into nationalism, and there's strife and conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you calling attention to that. I think part of what you're saying, right? And we had a conversation before coming on this podcast about, because you grew up hunting, I believe, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
and but stopped in your 20s, right? And are still, are you still a vegan to this day? Yeah.
Well, not vegan,
No.
but
But
I haven't eaten meat or any animals or birds
mm-hmm.
Since probably 28 years old.
Right. Okay. And one of the things you said, I think you said was, well, I don't know if that disqualifies me from being on the podcast, right? And I said, no, I think in fact it qualifies you. I think that's in fact entirely one of the reasons why I would like to talk to you. And not having known that you were a vegetarian at the time, or hadn't eaten meat. Because I think one of the things you're talking about is this division. And I see it as well. And I don't know if you can speak to this. There's a question coming, believe me. I don't know if you can speak to this a little bit, but part of what I hear, that's one of the reasons why I asked you about fear, is that in my opinion, I think part of these divisions that we create are, as you said, based upon identity and identification and things like this, and also fear-based, right? And that there's, even within hunting communities and different communities, there's a lot of little different sectors where people, plant their flag in one particular political arena, and it doesn't have to be like, I'm not necessarily talking, conservative or liberal here, or Democrat, Republican. I'm just talking the political in the larger sense of the word. And oftentimes I think some of that comes from fear. And yet still there is this place, um, this wilderness, and there's a wilderness out there, and as you said, there's a wilderness in here, um, that I think I have seen it truly uniting people, truly uniting different groups from different political groups, different identity groups, and really dissolving part of that fear that sort of drives, as you said, the power, and can drive some of these other things. I Yeah, I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit about, well, about perhaps why you stopped eating meat, and what that, yeah, what that means to you necessarily.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately what we point to, I think it's really important. This is why it's so important to become intimate with the inner
Mhm.
landscape, because that's where the fear is.
Yeah.
That's where human conflict is really being created and fear is being driven there.
Mhm.
What's afraid? Can we go inwardly and find out what's afraid?
Mhm.
Now, I can understand. I mean, when I was a teenager and I was really into hunting, I had this thing about fear. I had to conquer fear, right? And I used to do the silliest things. I had a 16 gauge sawed-off shotgun,
Mhm.
and I love that gun, right? And I used to know where there was paths, like in the southern New England, the the understory can be full of greenbrier and stuff. There's paths you wouldn't be able to walk off of. You just couldn't
Mhm.
walk through there.
Yeah.
And I knew where there were paths like that. And I would choose a night that I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. It had to be real overcast, very, very dark. And I would take my shotgun and I would go face fear. I
Mm.
figured I'm going to conquer fear, right?
Good luck
Not
with that. Yeah.
not realizing at the time that the urge to conquer fear is fear of fear.
Hmm.
Fear is trying to conquer fear. It ain't going to happen,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
I remember things would happen to me. I'd be walking in the dark, couldn't see a darn thing, and shuffling my feet along to know where the path was. And you at that and rough grouse, you
Mm.
can get almost right on top of them in those conditions before
Hmm.
they take off. And that would happen to me, and both barrels would go off just because I got so scared. But see, we have to go inward to understand what's motivating us.
Yeah.
The whole need to conquer fear is fear, and
Hmm.
fear is not going to conquer fear.
Hmm.
And so to become intimate with that and to become intimate with what is creating the fear.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not going to resolve it out there
Right.
in the outer wilderness.
Right.
It's lurking in the inner wilderness.
Yeah. And I do think it can be a place to start, right? And as you said, use as a metaphor for tracking the inner wilderness. And I also think, you know, to speak a little bit to the compassion that you were talking about when you were talking about hunting prior, there is a distinct lack of connection to the food that we eat, and uh, because I think, I don't know if it's because necessarily we don't want to investigate our own inner wilderness in a way, because if we're disconnected from something, if we don't see the death, if we don't see an animal dying, if we don't see the pain, then we don't have to confront it. And in a way, that's us also not necessarily having to confront some, internal things within us. But you're right, when we are confronted with that, when we do take the life of an animal, which, by the way, I never enjoy. It's never something that that I'm happy about. It's always a very melancholic and bittersweet moment, because largely it there's a whole lot of grief that comes with it, right? There's a grief of I mean, I've said this in other places. It's the end of a world, essentially, in a moment, right? Because you've said, and a lot of other people have said in places, right, that the deer or the bear or whatever, the deer is the forest, the bear is the mountain, right? It is all of those things. And when an animal dies, in essence, it is, there is a part or a moment of grief, because it is a part of that forest dying, a part of that mountain dying, and at the same time rebirthing, right? It's a death and a rebirth at the same
Yes,
moment.
yes,
Yeah. And so I think this is why the reason I asked you about your eating choices, because it's I think there's a real, when someone makes a conscious choice to eat in a particular way, I think I find a lot of value in that, and I hold that with a lot of respect, right? Because so many of us don't. I think, because it's just easier to go to the store, buy some bacon, buy a steak, unwrap it, slap it on the grill, eat it, and enjoy it, right? But we are missing out on all of those other things that you're talking about, right? We're missing out on eating the forest or eating the mountain, and also confronting our own fears and confronting our own grief. Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah. That's one of the things I love about your work. That's one of the things I love about the Wild Within, and some of the videos that you're putting out online as well. I wonder, can you speak a little bit? You said a couple of times, and I know what you're talking about, but I was just hoping you can unpack it for some people that may not. You've mentioned coyote, you said, and you've mentioned coyote, and not, the sense of the animal coyote, but a larger sense. I wonder if you can unpack what you mean by that a little bit when you're using the word coyote. Coyote, when coyote tracks the deer, when coyote, the coyote mentality, essentially.
yeah. I have a special kind of, I guess, affection for those animals. Here in the Northeast, coyotes are not like out in the West. They're much bigger. Some of them you would mistake for a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I've spent a lot of time face to face sometimes with them, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and they're so incredibly intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tracked them enough to watch them walking on the edge, a perimeter of the forest where there's a field and somebody's home. And as they track along, they come to an opening, and you see them slow down a little bit, and you can tell by their tracks they're looking at the house. They're watching us.
Mm-hmm.
We hardly ever see them, but they're watching us. They know all about us.
Yeah.
And they know we're deadly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They keep their space from us as best they can. Um, I used to do programs where I used to teach people how to stalk animals. I might have given up hunting, but I
Mm-hmm.
was hunting with a camera for
Mm-hmm.
decades, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and yeah, and grizzlies too. I would hunt with a camera
Yeah.
up in Alaska. Yeah, there was some adventures there. But back to the coyote, um, I could call them in easily.
Mm-hmm.
I would usually keep my stalking students down to about 5 people, and I would usually accomplish them seeing some wildlife, like deer or something.
Mm-hmm.
Before the program ended, when it was dusk and night was coming in, I would call the coyotes right into these people, and they would come right in. And these people were just like, they've never experienced, some of them, I think, were terrified. They could hear the coyotes, but they could never see them. They would
Mm-hmm.
never show themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we were doing this work with a biologist. They were trying to figure out how many different packs there were in this wilderness area in Massachusetts. And I had this friend too who had a parabolic mic. When we would call the
Mm.
coyote, they would come in. And with the parabolic mic, we could hear them circling us. But
Mm.
you
Mm-hmm.
never see them. But they were very curious and they were moving around us. They're, they're, I have some awe for those animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're amazingly cunning and, as you said, smart. And one of the most successful animals in living with humans, right? I think they are the most widespread mammal in North America, and I think they're even encroaching in South America as well. And they live in these, oftentimes in these liminal spaces. I was in San Francisco a few months ago, and there was a coyote just running down the street in San Francisco. And oftentimes see them in the cities. And these are not sick coyotes. They're thriving. They're thriving on the margins in those liminal spaces. Yeah.
There's a documentary, you might be able to find it on YouTube. They done a study in Chicago,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and they documented how many coyotes they thought were in the city limits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot. A lot of them.
You know what? I don't remember how many, but it's like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I recall, I haven't seen the documentary, but I read that study when I was writing my dissertation on a history of wildlife in California. I remember reading that study about coyotes in Chicago, and I don't remember how many it was either, but it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask about, and you've touched on this, but I wonder if you can. I'm going to ask it a little bit more directly, right?
Mhm.
What do you mean? You've written elsewhere. I think it's in Wildness Within, or it might be somewhere else. I don't remember anymore. But you've written or talked about stalking as meditation, right? I wonder if you can describe that or tell a story about what you mean by stalking as meditation.
Yeah, that's pretty simple. It just demands your absolute attention.
Yeah.
You know, uh, there's nothing more that needs to be said. It just, every
Yeah.
footfall, every movement is taken into consideration. Are
Mm-hmm.
you touching plants and making more movement? Where are you putting your feet? Have to be so viscerally aware and so present
Mm-hmm.
to stalk an animal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You
You
know,
do.
even
Yeah.
like when I used to hunt, to me it was moving like that. Moving like if you move for 1 minute, you stop for two. You
Mm.
s- you spend twice the amount of time stopped than you do walking.
Mm-hmm.
And it demands your presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that this may sound a little silly to some people, but if you scent the air, you tried to smell the air with short smells,
Mm-hmm.
and that brings you to the present often, makes you more present somehow. At
Mm-hmm.
least that's what I experience, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a lot to be said for smell and how it can bring us to different places, whether that's the present moment or even the past, right? A smell has a way,
Yeah, yeah.
um, it can bring us to our grandmother's kitchen, or it can bring us to, for me, anytime that I grew up training horses, and I grew up, riding horses, and so I spent a lot of time in horse stalls and, shoveling manure and things. And so, yeah, the moment that I smell, there's a I don't know if you go in barns often, but there's a very distinct smell of sawdust and hay and manure, and horsehair and dust that all kind of combines into one. And anytime I smell that, like, I always just wanted to bottle it, and because it reminds me of childhood, it reminds me of some of my happiest moments, and it reminds me also of the moments that I really, learned how to listen. Because when I hear you talking about stalking as meditation, when I hear you talking about tracking, even the inner wildness, right? What I hear the two words that come to mind, like, are attunement and listening. And even though, you've said, I think today, that tracking is very visual, and it's about sight, right? I also think there's a big level of listening, of attunement to it. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that also, that's not just in the tracking world, right? It's not just like, okay, I'm looking at the tracks or whatever, but that's also when we are tracking that wildness within, when we are tracking our own animal self. What do you see as the some of the larger ramifications of folks not really, attuning into that, to their own animal self, their own wildness within? What do you see some of the larger issues that have arisen from that?
Well, that's very traumatic.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's happening to this planet.
Hmm.
I mean, we just see it as stuff, dead stuff,
Mm.
unintelligent stuff, and it's just for us to use and abuse. And there's all this insensitivity. There's no compassion.
Hmm.
And what we're doing to the environment is just, well, despicable. And that's where the work you're doing becomes important, because people need to wake up to the fact that it's us. That's us. We're
Yeah.
doing this to ourselves. The
Yeah.
health of that ecosystem is my health. It's your health. It's our health. We're not
Yep.
separate from that.
Yeah.
Where does our sustenance and our lives come from?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that, to me, what you're bringing some intimacy to that. Then we need to bring that intimacy inward, because we're fragmenting things. We're fragmented inwardly, and that's affecting our politics. It's affecting nationalism.
Mm.
Different. Uh, it it it's a mess.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of ramifications of these things, and I think it goes beyond. It's often easy for us to think about the political situations, or, attacks on public lands, which are happening, more and more frequently. Although there's a lot of historical precedent for that as well. But I think for me, and at least with the men that I work with and the people that come to us, it's oftentimes is the internal thing. Right? It oftentimes is the internal struggle of not knowing themselves, not necessarily having a purpose, or understanding, being connected to it, right? And struggling in some way with mental health, although not being able to discern why, right? Like, perhaps being very successful, I put that word in quotes, but, like, very successful financially or with a job, and, all outwardly appearances seemingly great. However, inside are lacking something, right? Inside and they don't necessarily know what it is. And so that is a big reason why some people come to us, is because, yeah, they may from from their friends and their family, it seems like they have everything together, but inside they're like, no, but there's something missing, and I don't know what it is. And I know maybe if I go out into these mountains, maybe I can find it. Maybe it can give me a clue into how to tap into that, right? Um, and I do think that like the more people that can do that, right? The more people that can just not even just appreciate the bear and the deer and the coyote and the mountains and the rivers and whatever, that they can then begin to, as you've said so many times, begin to appreciate this inner landscape, this inner self, right? Yeah.
The whole fear thing that we've been talking about and the conflict
Mm-hmm.
has a lot to do with identification.
Yeah.
And it's hard to understand the ultimate mother of all identifications. That's a hard one to understand because it usually takes a lot of tracking the self to understand where that ultimate final identification is. But when we identify as, say, a Palestinian or a Jewish person or Ukrainian or Russian or a Muslim or a Catholic, uh, then that's where we find our security.
Mm-hmm.
We find our security in our even our power in those identifications.
Mm-hmm.
There's pride in that, and we're very attached to those identifications. But they're dividing us. And we find security there, and then when that's threatened by somebody else's identification, then there's fear.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, that fear is embedded in those identifications.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have a night just for a moment, if you didn't have any identifications, you're just a wild animal.
Mm-hmm.
You may be physically threatened, but you're not going to be psychologically threatened.
Yeah.
That's big difference.
Mm-hmm.
A physical threat is if you're physically threatened, you have an actual intelligent fear response. The
Right.
body, adrenaline, that's an intelligent response from the body. It's threatened. The body's threatened. Well, there's the self
Mm.
and its identifications.
Yeah.
And when that's threatened, it triggers all the sensations of the body and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you didn't have those identifications, I'm suggesting you'd have a lot less fear. The only time you would have fear is if you were physically threatened.
Mm-hmm.
But you see where I'm pointing.
I do. I do. I wonder. I mean, I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of different philosophies and practices and techniques and ways of life to help us release some of this identification. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what's been effective for you.
Okay, so what's really interesting in that, Ned, you see, any technique we do, if we call the identifications now, the identifications is bad and they're causing fear, so we need to do something. That whole
Right.
movement is fear.
Yeah. And I knew you were going to answer that question in that way when I asked it, and I still asked it. So yeah. Yeah. I get
See,
that.
we haven't become intimate enough with ourselves and how we respond to things and the motivation behind it. So
Mm-hmm.
we haven't done enough work in the inner landscape. If we've done a lot of work in the inner landscape, we wouldn't attempt to fight fear with fear.
Mm-hmm.
It just would be a moot. It just wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that, and I feel that too. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a it's a, and even the question is tends to be a result of the Western philosophy of treating symptoms,
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic for a whole other day. But I do want to respect your time, but I want to ask one question that I ask everybody this question, and sometimes I start with it, and sometimes I end with it. And you've answered this question indirectly, throughout this whole conversation. But I wonder if you're going to answer it a little bit more directly. And that is, what does wildness mean to you?
Okay. So wildness is something that's totally uncultivated.
Mm.
We see wildness we see wildness in nature as there is an intelligence there that's as ancient as the universe itself and timeless as the universe itself. And it is moving and it is creating, it is universal to all of us. That intelligence is wildness. And it's permeating all of us. We just live in our identifications and we get lost in our identifications and we don't grasp that that's there and that we can move as that instead of moving as our identifications and attached to our authoritarian principles. There's an underlying intelligence that is breathing all the lives we see, is being all the lives we see. We've done a lot of damage to nature, but at some point, nature can repair itself. It's just
Yeah.
not going to do so in our timeline.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, listen, humans might kill themselves off on this planet, but the planet's still going to be here, right? And I mean, and the larger ecosystem, solar system, that's not going anywhere either. Well, at least not now. At least not for a long while. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Paul. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to sit down and talk with you. I really appreciate your insights, and one of the I talked to a lot of different people about, or have been recently, about elderhood and the roles of the elders in our societies and the distinct lack of respect for them, and also the distinct disappearance of elders in our society. And I just want to say I do truly think that what you are putting into the world and what you are bringing into the world is that of elderhood, and that of turning one of the things that I always say, because I'm still figuring this out. I'm a little bit younger than you, and I'm still figuring all this stuff out myself. But one of the things I always say is that, I think at least, is that one of the jobs of the elder is to turn grief, or to turn a story into something nurturing for society, right? And I think, like, what you're doing with your story, and with your writing, and with some of the videos that you're putting out there, is exactly that. And so I just want to recognize that, and thank you for what you're putting out into the world, because it's really important, and we need as much of it as we can get. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Nick. I hope you keep doing what you're doing too. And just so you know, I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Learning doesn't stop.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we all are, right? We all are. Um, one last
That,
thing. Is there anything that you want to say, or if you feel like if you give like maybe one piece of advice to people that want to get in touch with their inner wildness, what would you say?
yeah, so I don't give advice, but I hope our conversation makes people realize how important that might be.
Okay. Well, thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it. I
Keep in touch, Ned.
absolutely, absolutely. We will absolutely keep in touch, and hope maybe sometime if I'm in Massachusetts, and
Please,
I'll give you a ring, man.
really, really,
I'll
please.
give
Yeah.
you a ring, and
All
you're welcome. If you ever come out here to the Eastern Sierra, you're welcome at my fire anytime as
right. Love
well.
to. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, Ned.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul. And thank you all out there as well. I'm going to be walking around, wading the rivers and tracking bear in the mountains and riding pros. And I hope you're doing whatever you can to stay wild as well. Till next time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Lab. If today's conversation stirred something in you and you're ready to connect to your own inner wildness, then check us out online on Instagram at Step Into Your Wild, or go on over to www.stepintoyourwild.com to learn more about our coaching services and wilderness academies offered through Walker's School of the Wild. Look, this is real work for real people who want to live with more clarity, more purpose, and more strength, but you don't have to figure it out alone. Let's walk this road together. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay wild.